science,
engineering,
medicine, chemistry,
physics,
biology, humanities, cardiology,
computing, public health, global
aeronautics, science communication.
Hi again, everyone. It's me, Gareth Mitchell, with another monthly update from this here university. Today, how women have been underrepresented in medical research and what it means for their risk of heart disease. Also, how psychedelics change people's worldview. And a chat with Imperial physicist Dr Jess Wade.
I want to look at more molecules. I want to look at more ways they interact with light and they interact with magnetic fields and how they change when charges move through them. I have so many questions.
And we have questions for Jess this month as we chat about her children's book on nanotechnology.
The Imperial College Podcast.
Right, well, let's jump in with some news. And of course, over recent days, we've seen more headlines about the Omicron variant. And a lot of that data is coming out of Imperial College, where the MRC Centre for Global Infectious Disease Analysis is playing a key role. From that centre, let's speak to Dr Sabine von Elslond. And what do we know so far out of this latest research about the increased risks from Omicron, Sabine?
Thank you, Gareth. So we released two reports in the last couple of days. The first report by Dr. Alexandra Hogan and Professor Ezra Ghani and their team, where they looked at the vaccine effectiveness and the effect of booster vaccines, but also the global impact of Omicron. And estimates suggest that boosters do lose some effectiveness against Omicron, but they remain vital to mitigate the global impact. And then another report was published also on the 16th by Professor Neil Ferguson and team, where they looked at the growth and population distribution and immune escape from Omicron in England specifically. And they show that Omicron largely evades the immunity from past infections as well as to vaccine doses.
Right, so that's the latest from Neil Ferguson. What does his research tell us about the increased effectiveness of then adding the booster then? How much difference does that make?
So the study finds a significant increased risk of developing a symptomatic Omicron case compared to Delta for those who were 2 or more weeks past their second dose of their vaccine or 2 or more weeks past their booster dose. That's both for AstraZeneca and Pfizer vaccines. And depending on the estimates that they used for effectiveness against symptomatic infection from the Delta variant, this translates into vaccine effectiveness estimates against symptomatic Omicron infection of between 0% and 20% after 2 doses only, but between 55 and 80% after a booster dose. So that's a huge difference. So that shows that the booster makes a huge difference.
What does the research tell us about the potential numbers of hospitalizations that we could see?
So the report shows that while the extent of waning or the loss of vaccine effectiveness against severe disease, which means the requiring of hospitalization for Omicron, seems less than against mild disease, so showing symptoms but not requiring hospitalization, even a small reduction in protection can result in significant rises in hospitalizations and deaths, particularly in high-risk groups. So that's where the boosters are really important.
What do we know, if anything, about the difference between people who have natural immunity from having had COVID versus those who have immunity from the vaccines?
So the studies find a strong evidence of immune evasion, and the risk of reinfection from Omicron is 5.4 times greater than that of the Delta variant. And that implies that protection against reinfection by Omicron afforded by past infections may be as low as 19%.
All right, Sabine, thank you very much indeed for giving us that update. Well, we're going to speak to Ellie Evans now, who's Digital Communications Officer at the Faculty of Medicine. And Ellie, welcome to the podcast. First time for you, I think, as well. And as we settle into Christmas, you bring us not 3 wise men, but 3 wise women. Tell me about this.
Yes, so our 3 Wise Women series on the Faculty of Medicine blog. We've been running this for 4 years now. And each year we invite 3 women scientists or experts in the Faculty of Medicine to write about their work and passions in their own words. And this is to give them a platform to share their ideas with the wider community and the public.
Right. And so can we hear a little bit about these women? Who are the three that you've chosen this Christmas?
Yeah, so first up we had Professor Faith Ozier, an immunologist by training, and is also Executive Director of the Human Immunology Laboratory at IAVI. She writes about bringing a global perspective to the pandemic and particularly the challenges faced with vaccine inequity. Something that stood out that she said was rich Western countries are providing booster shots to their populations while the majority in resource-constrained economies have not had a single shot. We can all do better in making sure that countries across the world have got resource to deliver vaccines and manufacture them.
Another of your three wise women is interested in COVID-19 messaging and the real importance of engaging with the public, isn't she?
Yes, so that would be Dr. Vicky Mail. So she's a reproductive immunologist and she's been working tirelessly on social media trying to dispel some of the mistruths around COVID vaccination and pregnancy and fertility. This has been an area where there's been a lot of mixed messaging and confusion about some of the advice. So she's put together a lot of evidence-based findings with the help of the British Society of Immunology, just to answer the public's questions, trying to get a clear message out.
So the third of our wise women has been supporting Imperial's COVID-19 response, hasn't she?
Yes, that's right. So Dr. Natsuko Imai, she's an epidemiologist and she's been working for Imperial's MRC Centre for Global Infectious Disease Analysis. So she's played a really pivotal role in making sure that the insights from the team are fed on to World Health Organization and to government ministers as well. So that's been a really fast-paced role and requests for data analysis coming in almost every day and every week. So she writes about what that's been like for her and some of the insights that she's learned.
Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed reading these words of wisdom from Imperial's three wise women for this Christmas. How can other people get involved with this and how can they read the article? Where is it?
So all three blog posts are available to read on the Imperial Medicine blog.
And they should come to the Faculty of Medicine to find it.
Yes.
All right, so there you go, folks. That's how to find those blogs by our three wise women for this Christmas. Ellie, thank you very much indeed for that. That's Ellie Evans telling us about those three wise women and their blogs. Well, now, why have women been so underrepresented in medical research? And in this context, we're talking about heart failure and how the condition affects women differently to men. Yet when it comes to diagnosis and treatment, women tend to be lumped in with the men, at least when it comes to the underlying evidence and research. Here's something that Dr Paz Tayal of the National Heart and Lung Institute is determined to tackle. And Paz has just been nominated for a Women in Science Award. She studies cardiomyopathy, as Hayley Dunning has been hearing.
I study a particular type of cardiomyopathy called dilated cardiomyopathy, and that's when the heart gets bigger, baggier, and can't pump blood effectively around the body.
So I know you're also looking particularly at cardiomyopathy in women. Why is this important to research?
So actually, there are some real differences in the hearts of men and women, even in health. Even if you look as young as prepubescent teenagers, their hearts differ very much so. And I and others have shown that hearts of patients with dilated cardiomyopathy also differ. I'm studying these differences to try and understand more about who gets the conditions, but also why patients' outcomes vary. So some patients will do really well, and some patients, unfortunately, will need to go on and have a heart transplant. And we're trying to understand that variability a bit better.
Now, I understand that men and women have different symptoms of heart attacks. So is that also true of these conditions? Do they have different symptoms?
That's a really awesome question, and we just don't know the answer to that at the moment for the way that these conditions present. So these conditions, cardiomyopathies, often present with what we call heart failure type symptoms. But you're so right, we've studied heart attack symptoms now really closely. And whilst men and women present with the same heart attack symptoms, women also get another layer of symptoms that aren't commonly recognised as women having a heart attack. And so one really important area for research that we just don't know about yet is whether the same is true for women who present with heart failure symptoms.
So why do you think this topic has been so understudied?
I think one is that it's just too obvious. So everyone gets very excited about the fancy pants bits of medicine or research and forgets really obvious things. So the basics between males and females. I think on a slightly more deeper level, you need to have quite big populations of patients with the affected condition to be able to study it. And so you really have to, what we call, scale up. And I think that's been a real challenge with research so far, to be able to answer some of these questions.
And so when you're talking about that you need large cohorts, is it that most of these studies just have been done in men historically and we need more studies into women's conditions?
Absolutely. So there's some really recent and really interesting data regarding heart failure clinical trials, and that whilst the condition does generally affect men and women equally, women historically have been underrepresented in most heart failure clinical trials. So even relative to the disease and how many women are affected with the disease, the proportion of women in clinical trials with the disease is lower than you would expect from the general and what we call prevalence of the disease. And that's really important, because that means that treatments and research is done on men and applied to women, but we don't know if that's necessarily appropriate. And now, as we're starting to look back at some of that older data or look at newer data in different ways, we're finding, for example, women get benefits from certain heart failure drugs at a different level than men do. We use a marker of heart function called ejection fraction, which is a measure of how the heart pumps blood out of the body. And the thresholds at which men and women get benefit is different. So women get benefit at what looks like a milder form of disease, but it may not actually be milder. It's just that we haven't studied women in detail to understand what that means.
Do you think there are other areas of medicine that could also benefit from studying more the differences between men and women?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's being done in a lot of diseases. One area that I've come across recently is asthma. So that differs a lot between males and females. And I think that's a real target in that area of research, to try and understand more about the differences.
Now, you were recently shortlisted for the L'Oréal UNESCO for Women in Science UK and Ireland Rising Talents Award. So what was that like?
It was awesome. It was just a real privilege and really humbling to be shortlisted for that, because it's such a diverse field. It wasn't just medicine, it was, all of science and life science and sustainability and mathematics. And so a really awesome bunch of female scientists. And one thing that really struck me about that whole experience was, do we even need Women in Science awards? But in one comment I heard on the day, which I think rings true, is depending on how you look at it, the last 1,000 years have been for men in science. And actually, it's really been brought home to me that women do really awesome science. They don't appear to get the recognition or support that they deserve for that. And so actually it's really important to celebrate female talent wherever it is seen, and for organisations and institutions to really celebrate, so that those coming through the ranks can be what they can see. They can see that women can do all of this, and women can do medicine, science, STEM, those sorts of fields.
Dr Paz Tayal talking there to Hayley Dunning. Taking psychedelics can change your worldview. Quite how one's picture of reality changes and how that varies according to the context is the subject of a fascinating study from Imperial's Centre for Psychedelic Research in the Department of Brain Sciences. The authors developed a questionnaire with which to gauge people's worldview positions. Emily Head has been speaking to postdoc Dr Chris Timmerman.
One of the classic worldviews is materialism, and it says, the fundamental nature of reality is physical, is material. Then you have another one, which is idealism, which no, it's the other way around. So we gave this questionnaire, we assessed the way that psychedelics change worldview in two different contexts. One was in a series of users that were going to go to a ceremony in which a psychedelic was being given, and then we did the same, but we did it in a clinical trial. So we set up a survey and we addressed their worldviews before, 1 month after, and 6 months after.
In your study, how did you find that psychedelics affect people's perceptions of reality?
We came in with the idea that, psychedelics might change the worldview from maybe a more materialistic one to a more idealistic one. Instead, we found something a bit different. We found that it's more like they became a bit more agnostic about the idea that it is actually matter or physicalism or materialism, the dominant position. We found another interesting thing in which people started to endorse the idea that everything in the world is conscious. This is the notion of panpsychism. And also, they tended to endorse more the possibility of fate. We found that these changes were sustained. So it's not just something that changed for a week or something. It's 6 months after that experience. Very intriguing aspect of this is we found that these changes were associated with betterments in well-being, pointing out a bit towards an intriguing notion that changes in beliefs, the way that you see reality, is not something that we hold only in abstract terms, but it may be something that we carry in our day-to-day life and may influence even the way that we engage with ourselves and with others and the way that we view our life and how good it is, for example.
Do these changes affect everybody in the same way, or do different people and their experiences affect them in different ways?
The more people were suggestible, the more likely it was that they would change their worldviews. And then the other element is, if in the acute experience people felt more connected with others in this ceremony, the more also they reported they would change their worldviews. An interesting notion in a lot of what we have found with psychedelics in recent years is the influence of context. So the idea is that the drug is not acting on its own, but it's also making salient, making more apparent everything that surrounds that drug experience. In this case, the social context, but also the characteristics, the history of the individual. So we found that this was an important variable here, the influence of context to drive these changes in metaphysical beliefs. We concluded from our findings that it appears that psychedelics are somehow enabling a form of reset of your beliefs. They may relax your beliefs. They make you endorse less a specific viewpoint. And then the shift, the specific direction that belief change might take, might be very dependent on the context in which the psychedelic is given.
How might these findings be used, and what do they mean for the general public at the moment?
We are currently in times in which there's a lot of interest in using these drugs, using them for personal purposes. There's also a strong clinical interest. The field of clinical psychiatry is starting to embrace psychedelic therapy in a very major way to treat depression, addictions, anxiety. So with this upsurge in psychedelic use, it seems that psychedelics they're acting on a very fundamental way to shift very important things about the person. It puts an important aspect on issues of consent. How can we inform people before they have a psychedelic experience that their views on the way that reality operates might shift? The other one is, how do we make sure that the context in which this drug is given upholds the necessary ethical requirements to safeguard participants from adopting a specific belief system, or even in the more riskier context, elements of manipulation?
Chris Timmerman speaking there to Emily Head. Well, finally, we're sitting down for a chat with author, Wikipedian and physicist Dr Jess Wade of Imperial's Blackett Laboratory. She's just authored a children's picture book about nanotechnology. The book is called Nano. The Department of Materials and the Royal Academy of Engineering have gifted 500 copies to disadvantaged primary schools in the UK. So how did Jess go from high school science and art nerd to research physicist to author? Kaylee Brewer of the Materials Department met up with Jess the other day.
Hi Jess, thanks for talking to us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Imperial College Podcast.
So, can you tell us more about your recent book, Nano?
So it's kind of a primer to nanotechnology. It's an introduction to atoms and molecules and elements and patterns that we see repeated in the kind of nanostructures that we create at Imperial, and then ways that we can apply those to new technologies, with a particular focus on technologies that build and support a more sustainable and a more equitable world, because I think they're really important. Imperial thinks they're really important, and certainly young people think they're really important. So yeah, it's kind of a primer. I would say it's the nanotechnology course you might do during your undergraduate, but condensed and for primary school children.
So what inspired you to write Nano?
I actually started off when I was at high school. I studied subjects like physics and chemistry and maths and advanced maths, and I actually did art. So I did art up until A-level, up until I finished school. And then I went to art school for a little while. So I went to art school at Chelsea College of Art and Design in London. And so I started this year of art. I actually ended up living in Italy for a little bit and doing history of art and Italian because I was completely fascinated by this concept of Renaissance artists and this ability that you could do everything, right? They were working with metal, they were working with wood, they were basically the world's most phenomenal architects. They were building these incredible domes on cathedrals and churches that you would never imagine you could do without a computer. And then I came and I studied physics at Imperial. By the end, I thought, this is what I want to do. I love being around these people who are so curious and asking all of these questions. I work with new materials for electronic devices, and I always feel like I'm kind of this molecular detective, like you're going around at this nanoscale thinking like, what's happening to that atom? What's sitting where? How's that process happening? And I really, really loved that. And then I had this phenomenal opportunity in October 2020 to start a research fellowship in the Department of Materials. And honestly, I think it's been the best and the most exciting career move and research opportunity that I've ever had in my life. It's such a fantastic and wonderful department to be in. I feel so lucky to have got to where I am in my research career. And I just want it to keep going. You know, I want to look at more molecules. I want to look at more ways they interact with light and they interact with magnetic fields and how they change when charges move through them. I have so many questions.
Thanks for sharing, Jess. Great to hear more. So moving on to talk about the collaboration between the Department of Materials and the Royal Academy of Engineering, 500 copies of Nano were actually sent to primary schools in the UK. Can you tell us more?
So we recently collaborated with the Royal Academy of Engineering as part of their great national Connecting STEM Teachers programme. This is a free programme. It supports teachers and school coordinators of STEM, science, technology, engineering and maths subjects by sending out lots and lots of resources to classrooms and resource boxes and resource books and things like that. This year, the theme for the resource boxes was sustainable futures, and kind of thanks to the generosity of the Department of Materials and the tenacity of the Royal Academy of Engineering, we included 500 copies of Nano to get sent out to schools from low economic and socio-economic backgrounds. So a huge, huge thanks to the Royal Academy of Engineering, who do so much all of the time to break down barriers on accessing engineering, but also to the Department of Materials, who are just wonderful.
So we've reached the last question of the podcast. What advice would you give to younger people who want to know more about material science?
Oh, that's such a fantastic question. I would tell young people to start looking around them, to start questioning the materials that they're interacting with in day-to-day life, whether that's something like a face mask or something like the antibacterial gel we're using to clean our hands. Or maybe you're interacting every day with metals and plastics and different kinds of structures. So start asking questions about the materials around you. I would check out the great resources at Discover Materials, a program supported a lot by the Imperial College Department of Materials. I would look up incredible places like the Institute of Making, and maybe just go into a museum one day. Choose something like the Science Museum, wander in, and start to explore all of the ways we've learned not only about materials, but about nanoscience, about quantum technology, and about new ways that we're going to build technologies that enable a future that is more fair, more sustainable, more clean, and more equal for everyone.
The excellent Jess Wade speaking there to Kaylee Brewer. Nano, the spectacular science of the very, very small, is authored by Jess Wade and illustrated by Melissa Castrion. It's published by Walker Books and it's out now. And on that nano note, we end this podcast having given you the big picture of what's happening this month here at Imperial. Gosh, the last one of the year. Where did that go? A huge thanks, by the way, to all the brilliant people at Pod HQ who put this together every month. You rock. And equally wholesome thanks to you for listening. I'm Gareth Mitchell, bidding you a happy, peaceful and safe Christmas and an amazing New Year. Bye-bye.